My stepdad slapped me so hard I tasted copper in my mouth, and as I fell against the hot cedar wood of the sauna, I realized my mother was watching and doing absolutely nothing. He screamed that I was a parasite because I refused to hand over my inheritance to fund his failing business. I walked out into a blizzard that night with blood on my lip and a vow of silence. They thought I would come crawling back when my money ran out. They had no idea that 5 years later, the federal auditor sent to destroy their empire would be the same daughter they left bleeding in the snow. Before I tell you how I sent my stepfather to prison, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save your own life. My name is Hannah, and today I am a 34-year-old forensic accountant running my own firm in New York City. But 5 years ago, I was just the disappointment of the Douglas family. We were spending Christmas in Aspen, Colorado, at a private ski lodge that cost more per night than I made in 3 months. That should have been the first red flag. My stepfather Douglas insisted on this trip to project the image of a thriving real estate mogul, even though I had noticed the cracks in the facade. He was leasing his cars. He was rotating credit cards. But nobody talked about money in our house unless it was to brag about how much we had. It was Christmas Eve. The air outside was 10 degrees below zero, but inside the private sauna it was suffocatingly hot. I was sitting on the lower bench trying to relax after a day of being ignored by my family when the heavy wooden door creaked open. Douglas walked in. He was a large man taking up too much space, his face flushed red from the heat and the expensive scotch he had been drinking since noon. He did not sit down. He stood directly in front of the door, blocking my only exit. I pulled my towel tighter around me, feeling a sudden spike of anxiety. The steam hissed as he poured water over the rocks, making the air thick and hard to breathe. He stared at me with eyes that were glassy and cold. "I need a favor, Hannah," he said, his voice deceptively casual. I looked up, sweat dripping down my forehead. "What kind of favor?" "I need access to that account your grandmother left you. Just a short-term loan. $50,000. I have a liquidity issue with the new development in Chicago. It is just a bridge loan until the bank releases the next tranche of funding on Monday." My stomach dropped. That $50,000 was everything I had. It was the inheritance my grandmother had secretly set up for me before she passed, explicitly stating that Douglas was never to touch it. It was my tuition for my Master's degree. It was my rent in New York. It was my freedom. "I cannot do that, Douglas," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the oppressive heat. "That money is for my education. You know that." Douglas laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Education. You are 29 years old, Hannah. You are still taking classes while your brother Brandon is out there making deals. You are playing school. I am building an empire. I need that money tonight. I need you to transfer it to the family trust." I shook my head. "No. I am sorry, but no. Grandma left that specifically for me." The atmosphere in the small room shifted instantly. The casual demeanor vanished, replaced by the bullying tyrant I had grown up with. He took a step toward me, looming over the bench. The heat seemed to spike, or maybe it was just my fear. "You are an ungrateful little leech," he spat. "I put a roof over your head for 10 years. I paid for your clothes, your food, your dental work. You think that was free? You are an investment, Hannah, and right now you are failing to yield a return. That money belongs to this family, and I am the head of this family." I stood up, clutching my towel, desperate to get past him. "I am not giving you the money, Douglas. Ask Brandon. Ask your investors. I am leaving." I tried to squeeze past him to reach the door, but he was faster. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my skin with bruising force. He shoved me backward. I stumbled, my bare back hitting the hot wood of the wall. I cried out in pain, but he did not stop. He ripped the towel from his own neck and snapped it at me, the wet fabric hitting my shoulder with a crack like a whip. "Do not walk away from me when I am talking to you," he roared. "You are nothing without me. You are a broke student living in a shoebox. I am offering you a chance to help this family to actually be useful for once, Transfer the money. Now. I looked him in the eye, my fear transforming into a cold, hard anger. You are broke, aren't you? That is why you are cornering me in a sauna on Christmas Eve. You are drowning Douglas, and you want to drag me down with you. I will never give you a cent. That was the moment he snapped. His hand moved so fast I didn't see it coming. The back of his hand connected with my face with a sickening thud. The force of the blow threw me sideways. My head slammed against the cedar bench. I tasted copper instantly as my lips split open against my teeth. I crumpled to the floor, the rough wood scraping my skin, the room spinning dizzily. For a second, the only sound was the hissing of the steam and my own ragged breathing. I touched my lip and my fingers came away bright red. I looked up at him. He wasn't horrified. He wasn't sorry. He looked annoyed, like I was a stain on his floor that he now had to clean up. Get up, he sneered. Stop being dramatic. The door opened again. Cold air rushed in, swirling with the steam. I looked up, hoping for salvation. It was my mother, Catherine, and my brother, Brandon. They stood in the doorway, taking in the scene. Me on the floor, bleeding. Douglas standing over me, his chest heaving. Mom. I gasped, tears mixing with the sweat on my face. He hit me. He is trying to take Grandma's money. My mother looked at me. Then she looked at Douglas. She saw the blood. She saw the bruise already forming on my cheek. And then she did the thing that broke my heart more than the slap ever could. She walked over to Douglas and handed him a fresh towel. Hannah, why do you always have to provoke him? She asked, her voice tired, as if my bleeding face was an inconvenience to her evening. It is Christmas Eve. We have guests arriving in an hour. Just give him the money, Hannah. Do not ruin the holiday for everyone. I stared at her, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. She wasn't asking if I was okay. She wasn't calling the police. She was negotiating my surrender. She was choosing her comfort over my safety, just like she always had. He hit me, Mom, I whispered. He wants to steal my tuition. It is a loan. Hannah Brandon chimed in, leaning against the doorframe, looking bored. He was the golden child, the one who got the cars and the internships, the one who never had to work for anything. Dad is good for it. Stop being so selfish. You know the company is expanding. We need cash flow. Just sign the transfer. I looked at the three of them. Douglas the abuser, Catherine the enabler, Brandon the parasite. They stood there united in their greed and their cruelty, waiting for me to break. They expected me to cry, to apologize, to hand over my phone and make the transfer just to make the pain stop. That is what I had done my whole life. I had always smoothed things over to keep the peace. But as I tasted my own blood, something inside me died. The part of me that wanted their love, the part of me that desperately wanted to belong to this family, it just withered away in that overheated room. I slowly pulled myself up from the floor. My head throbbed and my legs were shaking, but I forced myself to stand. I wrapped my towel around me like armor. I looked at Douglas, then at my mother. No, I said. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Douglas stepped forward, raising his hand again. You listen to me, you little. I did not flinch this time. I stared straight into his eyes. Touch me again and I will walk out of here and go straight to the Aspen police. I will show them this face. I will tell them about your financial desperation. I will tell your investors. Try me. Douglas hesitated. He saw something in my eyes he had never seen before. He saw that I had nothing left to lose. He lowered his hand, sneering. Fine, get out. But if you walk out that door, you are cut off. You are dead to us. Do not call when you fail. Well, do not come crawling back when you are starving in that city. I looked at my mother one last time. She wouldn't meet my gaze. She was busy adjusting the cuff of Douglas's robe, smoothing out the wrinkles, pretending none of this was happening. I am not the one who is going to fail Douglas. I said, my voice quiet but steady. And when I come back, it won't be to crawl. I walked past them, bumping Brandon's shoulder as I exited the sauna. The cold air of the hallway hit my wet skin like a physical blow, but it felt cleansing. I went to my room. I did not cry. I did not panic. I moved with mechanical precision. I packed my bag. I put on my thermal layers, my coat, my boots. I grabbed my laptop, the only thing of value I owned. I walked down the grand staircase of the lodge. I could hear them in the living room. I heard the pop of a champagne cork. I heard my mother laughing a shrill fake sound. They were celebrating. They thought they had won. They thought they had disciplined the rebellious child, and that I was upstairs sulking. I walked out the front door into the blizzard. The snow was falling in thick sheets, visibility near zero. I got into my rental car, a beat-up Honda that Douglas had made fun of when I arrived. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove down the mountain in the dark, the road's treacherous tears finally streaming down my face, stinging the cut on my lip. I drove all the way to Denver that night. I slept in the car because I was too afraid to spend money on a hotel. I was terrified. I was alone. I had no family. But as I watched the sunrise over the Rockies the next morning, I made a vow. Douglas loved money. He loved power. He loved thinking he was smarter than everyone else. So I was going to become the one thing he feared most. I wasn't just going to be an accountant. I was going to become a hunter. I returned to New York, and I disappeared. I changed my phone number. I blocked them on every social media platform. I threw myself into my studies with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. I finished my master's degree in record time. I didn't just study accounting. I studied fraud. I studied embezzlement. I studied the psychology of white-collar criminals. I learned how men like Douglas hid their money, how they cooked their books, how they used shell companies and offshore accounts to pretend they were gods while they were actually thieves. I worked 18-hour days. I ate cheap noodles. I lived in a studio apartment the size of a closet. But every time I felt tired, every time I wanted to quit, I touched the faint scar on my lip. I remembered the heat of the sauna. I remembered my mother handing him the towel. 5 years passed. I climbed the ranks faster than anyone expected. I had a knack for seeing patterns in numbers that others missed. I could look at a balance sheet and see the lie hiding behind the decimal points. I was recruited by Spector and Associates, the most ruthless forensic accounting firm in Manhattan. We were the people the banks called when they suspected their biggest clients were lying. We were the people the FBI called when they needed to untangle a web of corruption. I became a ghost. I had no online presence, no Facebook, no Instagram. My name appeared only in sealed court documents and confidential audit reports. I became rich, quietly rich. I invested my bonuses. I bought a penthouse in Tribeca under an LLC. I drove a Porsche that I kept in a private garage. But I never flaunted it. To the outside world, to anyone who might be looking for Hannah. The disappointed stepdaughter, I simply didn't exist. But I was watching them. Every morning before I started my work for clients, I spent 30 minutes tracking Douglas. It was easy. Men like him cannot help but leave a trail. He was loud. He was flashy. I pulled the public records of his company, Douglas Estates. I saw the expansion. I saw the new developments in Florida and Chicago. I saw the press releases about his brilliance. But because I knew where to look, I also saw the rot. I saw the liens against his properties. I saw the lawsuits from unpaid contractors that were quietly settled and sealed. I saw the turnover in his finance department. He was firing CFOs every 6 months. That is the reddest flag in the corporate world. It means the accountants are refusing to sign off on the fraud. I watched Brandon get married. He married a woman named Keisha, the daughter of a wealthy Chicago banking family. I saw the wedding photos in the society pages. My mother was wearing a dress that cost more than my college tuition, smiling that same fake smile. I looked at Keisha in the photos. She looked smart. She looked sharp. and she looked isolated. I knew exactly what Douglas was doing. He wasn't just gaining a daughter-in-law, he was hunting for new capital. He needed Keisha's family money to plug the holes in his sinking ship. I waited. I knew the collapse was coming. Ponzi schemes and leverage frauds always collapse. It is just a matter of math. You can rob Peter to pay Paul for a long time, but eventually Peter brings a gun. Then 2 weeks before Christmas, the call came. I was sitting in my corner office overlooking the Hudson River, reviewing a file on a pharmaceutical CEO who had been buying private islands with company funds. My private cell phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was Connecticut. I stared at it. I knew. My instincts honed by 5 years of hunting, liars screamed at me. I swiped answer. "Hello," I said. My voice professional detached. "Hannah, is that you?" It was Douglas. His voice hadn't changed, but the tone had. Gone was the arrogance. Gone was the booming authority. He sounded thin. He sounded desperate. He sounded like a man who was looking over his shoulder. "Douglas," I said, "how did you get this number?" "It does not matter," he said, rushing his words. "Listen, Hannah. It is your mother. She is sick. It is bad. Stage 4. She has been asking for you. She wants the family together for Christmas. You need to come home." I leaned back in my leather chair, spinning a pen through my fingers. I looked at the 3 monitors on my desk. On the far right screen, I had a background check running on Catherine Douglas. I had updated it just yesterday. There were no medical claims, no oncology visits, but there were massive credit card debts. I knew he was lying about the cancer. My mother was a hypochondriac who went to the ER for a hangnail. If she had stage 4 cancer, it would be on the front page of the local paper. She would be milking it for every ounce of sympathy. No, this wasn't about cancer. "Why are you really calling Douglas?" I asked. "I told you it is your mother. How can you be so cold? She is dying. Hannah, we are in Connecticut. The house looks beautiful. We just want to bury the hatchet. Please, just come home." I paused. I looked at the file on my desk. It wasn't the pharmaceutical file anymore. It was a new dossier that had arrived that morning via courier from a contact at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. It was a subpoena, a secret subpoena, targeting Douglas Estates for tax evasion and massive wire fraud. They were coming for him, and he needed a scapegoat. He needed someone with accounting credentials to come in and sign retroactive financial statements. He needed someone he could bully, someone he thought was weak, someone he thought was still the broke, scared girl he slapped in a sauna. He didn't want a daughter, he wanted a fall guy. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that reflected in the glass of my office window. "Okay, Douglas," I said. "I will come. I will be there for Christmas." "Thank God," he exhaled. "Thank God. You are doing the right thing, Hannah. We will see you soon." I hung up the phone. I pressed the intercom button for my assistant. "Get the jet ready," I said, "and call the team. I need 3 auditors and a security detail prepared to travel to Connecticut. We are going hunting. I wasn't going home to make peace. I was going home to make sure the handcuffs fit." 5 years is a long time to hold your breath. But standing in my corner office on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, I finally exhaled. The view from here was nothing like the jagged, suffocating peaks of Aspen. It was steel glass and the relentless grid of New York City. The girl who had been slapped in a sauna and left to freeze was gone. In her place stood the senior partner of Spector and Associates, the most feared forensic accounting firm on Wall Street. My assistant, a sharp young man named Leo, opened the door without knocking. He knew better than to waste time on pleasantries. The raid on biogenics was entering its 4th hour, and the air in the conference room down the hall was thick with the smell of fear and expensive cologne. "They are trying to shred the physical files in the archives," Leo said, his voice calm. I didn't even blink. "Let them. We mirrored their servers at 3 o'clock this morning. Anything they shred now just adds an obstruction of justice charge to the indictment. I adjusted the cuffs of my silk blouse and walked out of my office. The hallway was a hive of activity. My team moved with the precision of a SWAT unit, but instead of guns, they carried tablets and banker's boxes. We were not here to arrest anyone. We were here to find the money. And I always found the money. I walked into the main conference room where the board of directors for biogenics was currently being held. The room was chaos. Men who were used to being treated like gods were currently sweating through their Italian suits, shouting at their lawyers. But the moment I stepped inside, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Silence rippled outward from the doorway, until the only sound was the hum of the hard drive duplicators my team had set up on the mahogany table. The general counsel for the company, a man named Mr. Thorne, stormed toward me. He was the kind of lawyer who charged $1,000 an hour to bully people. He was red-faced, veins bulging in his neck, pointing a finger at me that trembled slightly. "You have no right to be in here," he shouted, spraying spit. "This is a private company. I will have your license. I will sue your firm into oblivion. Who do you think you are?" I stopped. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I looked at his finger, then up to his eyes. My expression was bored. "I am not the police, Mr. Thorne." I said, my voice low, but cutting through the room like a razor. "I am the audit." He sputtered, trying to find his footing. "We are compliant. We have passed every audit for the last 10 years. You passed those audits because you showed them what you wanted them to see," I interrupted, walking past him to the head of the table. I picked up a file folder that one of my analysts had left for me. It was thin, unassuming. I opened it. "But you made a mistake," I continued, not looking at him. "You got arrogant. You thought you could hide $300 million in losses by creating a shell company in the Cayman Islands and listing it as a research and development vendor. Project Icarus. That is what you called it. Right?" The blood drained from Thorne's face so fast he looked like a corpse. The other board members froze. They thought Project Icarus was a secret buried so deep no one would ever find it. They didn't know I had spent the last 6 months tracking the digital footprints of every wire transfer they had made since 2018. I tossed the file onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right in front of the CEO. "That file contains the routing numbers, the beneficiary names, and the emails you sent to your mistress discussing how you were going to use the embezzled funds to buy a villa in Tuscany," I said. "It also contains the date and time you falsified the FDA trial results to boost your stock price." The CEO looked at the folder as if it contained a bomb. He didn't touch it. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with the realization that his life was over. "Who are you?" he whispered. I leaned in, placing my hands on the table. "I am the person who reads the footnotes," I said. "I am the person who knows that numbers do not lie, but men do. And right now, gentlemen, the math says you are going to prison." I turned to my team. "Pack it up. We have everything we need. Send the preliminary report to the SEC and the district attorney by noon." As I walked out of the conference room, leaving a room full of ruined men in my wake, I felt a cold, hard satisfaction in my chest. This was my drug. This was how I healed. Every time I took down a man like the CEO of Biogenics, a man who thought he was untouchable, a man who thought he could use people and discard them, I was really taking down Douglas. I returned to my office and closed the door, shutting out the noise. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. I was untouchable here. I had built a fortress of reputation and wealth. I had $4 million in liquid assets, a portfolio of real estate, and the kind of power that made grown men tremble. But I wasn't happy. I was hungry. I walked over to the wall safe behind my desk. I punched in the code and the heavy steel door swung open. Inside there was no money. There were no jewels. There was just a single thick dossier. I pulled it out. The label on the front read, "Douglas Estates." I sat down at my desk and opened the file. This was my passion project. For 5 years while I was building my career, I had been building this file. Every public record, every lawsuit, every lien. I knew more about Douglas S. business than he did. I traced the lines of the organizational chart I had drawn. Douglas Estates was a house of cards. He was leveraging debt to pay off debt. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, just like I knew he would. But recently, the pattern had changed. He was desperate. I saw the new loans. High-interest short-term loans from lenders that didn't ask questions but broke kneecaps if you didn't pay. He was bleeding cash. And then I saw the marriage license. Brandon, my useless brother, had married Keisha Williams. I knew the Williams family name. They were old money from Chicago, conservative, wealthy, and private. They were exactly the kind of people Douglas would target. He wasn't just welcoming a daughter-in-law. He was looking at a piggy bank. I flipped the page to the most recent credit report. Douglas had maxed out every line of credit. He was 3 months behind on the mortgage for the house in Connecticut. The house my mother was so proud of. The house they had kicked me out of. They were drowning, and sharks can smell blood in the water from miles away. My phone on the desk buzzed. It was a personal line, a number only 5 people in the world had. I looked at the caller ID. It was a Connecticut area code. I stared at the screen. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I felt a strange, icy calm settle over me. I knew who it was. I had been waiting for this call for 5 years. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to wonder if the number was wrong. I wanted him to feel that tiny flicker of hope beginning to die. Then I picked up. "This is Hannah," I said. The voice on the other end was familiar, but it was wrong. It lacked the booming arrogance I remembered. It was thin, reedy, and laced with a panic that he was trying desperately to hide. "Hannah, is that really you?" "Hello, Douglas," I said. "It has been a long time," he said, trying to sound warm, trying to sound like a father. "We have missed you." I didn't say anything. I just listened to him breathe. I looked at the file on my desk, at the foreclosure notices, at the evidence of his fraud. "Listen, Hannah," he continued, the desperation leaking through. "It is your mother. She is sick. It is cancer. Stage 4. It happened so fast." I looked at the background check I had run on my mother just yesterday. No oncology visits, no chemotherapy claims, just a lot of visits to high-end spas and a new lease on a Mercedes she couldn't afford. He was lying. Of course he was lying. He didn't want me to come home to say goodbye. He wanted me to come home because he needed something. "She wants to see you, Hannah," he said, his voice cracking. "She wants the family together for Christmas. Please, can you come home?" I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the skyline. I held his fate in my hands. I could hang up. I could let the IRS and the banks tear him apart. But that would be too easy. That would be impersonal. I wanted to see the look in his eyes when he realized who I had become. I wanted to be the one to deliver the final blow. I looked at the dossier one last time. I saw the upcoming tax deadline. I saw the fraudulent financial statements he was trying to prepare. I knew exactly what he was going to ask me to do. He thought I was still just a student, someone desperate for approval, someone he could bully into cooking his books. He was inviting a shark into his swimming pool. "Okay, Douglas," I said softly. "I will come home." "Thank you." He wept. "Thank you, Hannah. You are a good daughter." I hung up the phone. I didn't feel like a good daughter. I felt like an executioner sharpening her blade. I pressed the intercom. "Leo, cancel my meetings for next week." "Is everything okay?" he asked. "Everything is perfect," I said. "I am going home for Christmas." "And Leo?" "Yes, prepare the jet. And get me the hard copies of the Douglas Estates file. All of them. We are going to need them." I stood up and walked to the window, watching the snow begin to fall over Manhattan. It reminded me of Aspen. It reminded me of the cold. But this time, I wasn't the one freezing. I was bringing the storm with me. I left the chaos of the biogenics boardroom behind me. and stepped into the cool silence of my private elevator. The door slid shut, cutting off the sounds of panicked executives and shredding machines. The ascent to my penthouse in Tribeca was smooth and swift, a physical transition from the Shark Tank of Wall Street to the fortress I had built with the bones of companies that dared to lie to me. My apartment was a sanctuary of glass and steel suspended above the city lights. It smelled of expensive candles and isolation. I kicked off my heels by the door, ignoring the housekeeper's perfectly arranged slippers. I did not want comfort tonight. I wanted truth. I walked straight to my study, bypassing the living room with its panoramic view of the Hudson River. The study was the heart of my operation, a windowless room soundproofed against the world where the real work happened. Behind a large, abstract painting that I had bought at an auction simply because my mother would have hated it lay my wall safe. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner. The lock disengaged with a heavy, satisfying thud. Inside, there were no stacks of cash, no diamonds, no bonds. There was only a single thick red accordion folder. I carried it to my desk and sat down. The leather chair creaked softly as I leaned back, the folder heavy in my hands. This was my nightly ritual. This was my obsession. The label on the front was handwritten in black ink, Douglas Estates. I opened it. The smell of paper and ink filled the air. This file contained 5 years of forensic analysis. It was a roadmap of my stepfather's greed. To the public, Douglas was a real estate tycoon, a man who drove a Bentley and vacationed in St. Bart's. To me, he was a math problem that didn't add up. I pulled out the latest credit report I had obtained through my network. It was a sea of red ink. Douglas was drowning. He was $15 million in debt. I ran my finger down the list of liabilities. Construction loans with interest rates that bordered on usury. Personal lines of credit maxed out to the limit. He was leveraging assets he didn't even fully own to pay for the lifestyle that kept his reputation afloat. I picked up a photo that my private investigator had snapped last week. It showed Douglas getting into his Bentley Continental GT outside a country club. He looked tan and confident, laughing with a man I recognized as a local politician. But I looked closer at the photo. I looked at the license plate. I cross-referenced it with the DMV database on my laptop. The car was leased. And not just leased, the payments were 60 days past due. The leasing company had already issued a repossession notice. He was driving a car that could be taken from him at any stoplight, all to impress people who would turn on him the moment the checks bounced. It was pathetic. It was a house of cards built in a wind tunnel. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, a classic Ponzi structure where new investment money was used to pay off old debts rather than being put into development. But the cycle was speeding up. He was running out of Peters. I turned the page and froze. There was a new clipping in the file, something I hadn't analyzed in depth yet. It was a printout from a society blog in Chicago. The headline screamed, "Golden Merger." I stared at the photograph. It was my brother Brandon. He was standing next to a woman I recognized instantly, not from family gatherings, but from my research into high-net-worth individuals. Keisha Williams. She was stunning, poised, and radiating an intelligence that Brandon had never possessed. I knew the Williams family. They were old-money Chicago banking royalty. They were the kind of family that had buildings named after them. They were private, conservative, and immensely wealthy. And Brandon, my lazy, entitled brother, who had never held a job he didn't get from Daddy, was marrying her. I looked at the date on the article. They had been married last month in a private ceremony. I looked at Douglas in the background of the photo. He wasn't looking at his son with pride. He was looking at Keisha with hunger. The pieces fell into place with a sickening click. Douglas wasn't just expanding his family. He was hunting. He had run out of traditional lenders. The banks had cut him off. The hard money lenders were knocking at his door. So he had sent Brandon out to catch a whale. Keisha was the whale. I pulled up the background check on Keisha. She was a lawyer for a nonprofit. She was smart, but she was likely naive about the kind of predators that lived in her own home. She probably thought she was marrying into a successful real estate dynasty. She probably saw the Bentley and the country club membership and assumed the balance sheets matched the lifestyle. She had no idea she was marrying into a bankruptcy in progress. Douglas was going to target her dowry. He was going to try to access the Williams family trust. He would use Brandon to guilt her, to manipulate her, to get her to sign over assets to save the family business during a temporary cash flow problem. It was exactly what he had tried to do to me in the sauna 5 years ago. The pattern was identical. Find a woman with resources, isolate her, intimidate her, take everything she has. My blood ran cold. Keisha wasn't just a sister-in-law I had never met. She was a victim in waiting. And she was smart enough that if she figured it out, she could destroy him. But Douglas was betting he could break her before she realized what was happening. I looked back at the debt sheet. 15 million. He needed a massive injection of cash immediately to stop the collapse. The wedding was his Hail Mary. But looking at the legal structures of the Williams Trust, which I pulled up on my secure server, I saw a complication. Her money was tied up. It was in liquid. Accessing it would take time and signatures from trustees. Douglas didn't have time. He was going to get desperate. And when Douglas got desperate, he got dangerous. He would need a stopgap. He would need someone to cook the books, to falsify records, to show the banks that the Williams money was incoming, even if it wasn't. He needed a bridge to get him to the gold mine. I realized then that I wasn't just watching a train wreck. I was watching a crime in motion. I closed the file. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. The anger had burned away years ago, leaving only a cold, hard resolve. I looked around my penthouse. The silence was absolute. I had built this life to be impenetrable. But looking at Keisha's face in that photo, I knew I couldn't stay inside my fortress forever. Douglas was going to call me. I knew it with the certainty of gravity. He couldn't get the money from Keisha fast enough. He couldn't get it from the banks. He needed a magician. He needed an accountant who could make losses look like profits just long enough to fool the auditors. He thought I was still the broke graduate student he had discarded. He thought I was weak. He had no idea that the daughter he slapped had grown up to become the person who put men like him in prison for a living. I sat there in the dark, watching the city lights of Manhattan, and waited. The phone was going to ring, and when it did, I was going to answer. Not as a victim, but as the end of the line. The phone rang. It wasn't a normal ring. It sounded like an alarm bell cutting through the silence of my Tribeca penthouse. I stared at the screen. Connecticut area code. It was him. I didn't answer on the first ring. I let it go to the second, then the third. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to doubt. When I finally swiped the green icon, I didn't say hello. I just listened. Hannah. Is that you? The voice was familiar yet distorted. It lacked the booming, arrogant timbre that used to shake the walls of our house in Aspen. It was thin, reedy, vibrating with a performative tremor that I recognized instantly. It was the voice of a man trying to sell a lemon as a luxury car. "Hello, Douglas," I said. My voice was a flat line. No emotion, no warmth, just business. "Oh, thank God," he breathed, the sound wet and ragged. "I didn't think you would answer. It has been so long, Hannah. So long." I leaned back in my leather chair, my eyes locked on the dossier open on my desk. I traced the line of a foreclosure notice with my index finger. "Why are you calling Douglas?" I asked. "I am busy." I know, he rushed to say. "I wouldn't call if it wasn't urgent, if it wasn't life or death." I paused. He was setting the hook. "What is it?" "It is your mother," he whispered. "Catherine. She is sick, Hannah. It is bad." I looked at the third monitor on my desk, the one displaying the real-time background check I had run on my mother just that morning. I scrolled through her recent credit card activity. Neiman Marcus. Sephora. A $300 lunch at a French bistro yesterday. What kind of sick, I asked, watching the data contradict every word coming out of his mouth. Cancer, he choked out. Stage 4. It is in her pancreas. The doctors say she doesn't have much time. Maybe weeks. She just wants to see you. She wants the family together one last time for Christmas. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. It was a lie so audacious, so easily disprovable that it was almost insulting. My mother was a hypochondriac who posted on Facebook every time she had a migraine. If she had stage 4 cancer, she would have started a GoFundMe and given interviews to the local paper by now. There were no oncology bills in the report, no chemotherapy claims, just desperate spending and mounting debt. He wasn't calling because she was dying. He was calling because he was dying. His business was on life support, and he needed a donor. He needed someone with a CPA license to sign off on the fraudulent loan applications he was undoubtedly preparing for Keisha's family trust. He needed a scapegoat, and he thought I was still the naive girl he could bully into submission. He wanted me to come home to save him, not her. Please, Hannah. He begged, his voice cracking perfectly on cue. Put the past behind us. Just for her sake, come home. I let the silence stretch. I imagined him on the other end of the line, gripping the receiver, sweat beading on his forehead, looking at his unpaid bills. I held his fate in my hand. I could hang up. I could tell him I knew everything. I could tell him to rot. But that would be mercy. And I wasn't in the business of mercy anymore. I closed the dossier on my desk. I made my decision. I would go back. Not as a daughter returning to the fold, but as a predator entering the cage. Okay, Douglas, I said softly. I will come. I could hear the air rush out of his lungs. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Hannah. You are a good daughter. We will see you soon. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. The silence rushed back into the room, but it felt different now. It felt charged. Electric. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. Leo, I said. Yes, boss. His voice was crisp, immediate. Cancel my meetings for next week. Clear the schedule. Is everything all right? Everything is perfect, I said, standing up and walking to the window to look out at the city lights one last time. I am going home for Christmas. I paused, watching a police siren wail in the distance below. And Leo, prepare the full legal dossier on Douglas Estates, the unredacted version. And get the jet ready. We are going hunting. I parked the beige Toyota Corolla at the bottom of the driveway, making sure the tires crunched loudly on the gravel. I could have rented a luxury sedan. I could have had my driver bring me in the Maybach. But predators do not show their teeth until it is too late. So I arrived in a car that smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation, wearing a puffer jacket I bought at a discount store near the airport. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. No makeup. Hair pulled back in a messy, anxious bun. Dark circles under my eyes that I had carefully applied with contour powder. I looked exhausted. I looked defeated. I looked exactly like the victim Douglas wanted to see. The house loomed above me as I walked up the path. It was a Georgian colonial monstrosity that screamed new money trying to look old. From the street it was impressive, but I was close enough now to see the cracks. The landscaping was overgrown at the edges, wild vines choking the manicured hedges. A shutter on the second floor was hanging slightly askew. The paint on the massive white columns was peeling just enough to notice if you were looking. And I was always looking. I didn't knock. I still had a key, a heavy brass thing I had kept on my keychain for 5 years, as a reminder of what I had lost. I unlocked the door and stepped into the foyer. The first thing that hit me was the cold. It was freezing inside. The thermostat must have been set to 50 degrees. I could see my breath clouding in the air before me. It was the first undeniable proof of their ruin. People with money do not freeze in their own mansions in Connecticut in December. They were saving money on heating oil. They were choosing between warmth and appearances. Hello? I called out, letting my voice crack just a little. Mom, Douglas. The silence was heavy, oppressive. It smelled of lemon polish and underlying rot. I walked into the formal living room. The Christmas tree was there 12 feet tall and loaded with crystal ornaments, but the lights were off. It stood like a dark skeleton in the corner. And there she was. My mother, Catherine, was draped across a velvet chaise lounge in the center of the room. The staging was almost impressive. She was wearing a silk dressing gown that I knew cost more than my first car. A cashmere blanket was artfully arranged over her legs. The heavy curtains were drawn against the afternoon light, casting the room in a theatrical gloom. "Hannah," she whispered. Her voice was thin, trembling. "Is that you?" I walked closer, my boots thudding softly on the Persian rug. She lifted a hand toward me. It was shaking, but on her finger the 5-carat diamond ring Douglas had bought her 3 years ago still glittered in the dim light. It was dazzling. It was also fake. I had seen the appraisal report in the file. Douglas had swapped the real stone for a cubic zirconia months ago to pay off a gambling debt. She didn't even know she was wearing a lie. "Mom?" I said, rushing to her side and kneeling on the floor. "I am here," Douglas called. "He said you were dying." She let out a long, shuddering sigh and brought a glass to her lips. It wasn't water. It wasn't medicine. It was white wine. I caught the scent immediately. Crisp, floral, expensive. A vintage Sancerre. She was supposedly dying of stage 4 cancer, but she was drinking a $60 bottle of wine at 2 in the afternoon. "Oh, Hannah," she moaned, closing her eyes. "It is so hard. The pain, the exhaustion. I just wanted to see you one last time before the end." I looked at her. Really looked at her with the cold, analytical eyes of a forensic auditor. Her skin wasn't jaundiced, her eyes weren't sunken. She hadn't lost weight. In fact, her face looked puffy, bloated from sodium and alcohol. There were no pill bottles on the side table, no oxygen tank, no hospice pamphlets, just the wine bottle and a stack of unopened mail on the coffee table that I recognized instantly from the red envelopes. Final notices. She wasn't sick. She was drunk. She was suffering from the only disease that ever truly afflicted Catherine Douglas: status anxiety. She was terrified. She knew the walls were closing in. She knew the money was gone. The stress was eating her alive, manifesting as this performance of fragility. She needed to be the victim, because if she was the victim, nothing was her fault. If she was dying, no one could blame her for the bankruptcy. No one could ask her why she let her husband steal from her children. I held her hand. It felt clammy. "I am here now, Mom," I said, forcing warmth into my voice while my eyes scanned the room, cataloging the assets I would soon seize. "You don't have to worry about anything." She squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong for a dying woman. "You are a good girl, Hannah. I knew you would come. Douglas has been so worried. He has been trying to hold everything together for me." I almost laughed. Douglas wasn't holding anything together. He was currently hiding in his office, probably shredding documents. "Where is he?" I asked. "In the study," she said, taking another long sip of wine. "He is working so hard. He is trying to make sure we are taken care of." I stood up. The cold in the house was seeping into my bones, but the fire in my chest kept me warm. "Rest, Mom," I said. "I am going to go talk to Douglas. I am going to help." She nodded, her eyes drifting shut, already checking out of reality. "Go. Help him. He needs you." I turned away from the pathetic tableau on the couch. She was an actress on a sinking stage playing to an empty theater. She didn't need a doctor. She needed a reality check. And I was about to deliver a bill she couldn't pay. I walked toward the study, the sound of my cheap boots echoing in the hallway. I wasn't the daughter coming home. I was the repo man. And I was here to collect. Lunch was served in the formal dining room, a cavernous space with velvet wallpaper and a chandelier that looked like it belonged in a ballroom, not a private home. The table was set for 12, but only 2 places were occupied. Douglas sat at the head, and he had placed me at his right hand, a position of honor that felt more like being placed within striking distance. The meal was a cold cucumber soup that tasted like dishwater and a dry chicken salad. We ate in silence. The only sounds were the scraping of silver against china and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. My mother was upstairs resting, or more likely hiding from the reality of her life with a bottle of Chardonnay. Douglas didn't ask me about my flight. He didn't ask where I was living. He didn't ask if I was happy or if I was seeing anyone or if I had recovered from the trauma of 5 years ago. To him, I was the appliance he had taken out of storage because he needed to blend a smoothie. I wasn't a person. I was a function. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, dropped it onto his half-eaten salad, and leaned back in his chair. The wood creaked under his weight. He looked at me, his eyes scanning my cheap puffer jacket that I had kept on because the house was still freezing and my scuffed boots. He saw exactly what I wanted him to see: failure, desperation, compliance. So he said, picking a piece of chicken out of his teeth, "I hear you are still crunching numbers in the city. Tax returns for bodegas and dog walkers, right?" I kept my eyes on my water glass. "Something like that," I murmured. "It pays the rent." Barely, I assume he sneered. "You look thin, Hannah. And that car out front. A Corolla Jesus. I thought you had ambition." I didn't say anything. I let the insult land. I let him think he was the big man on campus. It fed his ego, and a fed ego is a blind ego. He reached under the table and pulled out a heavy cardboard box. He slammed it onto the pristine white tablecloth. The china rattled. Dust motes danced in the shaft of winter light coming through the window. "I need you to do something for me," he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming conspiratorial. "Since you are here, and since you are technically a CPA, I want to give you an opportunity. A chance to make some real money for once." I looked at the box. It wasn't labeled. "What is this?" "It is the prelims for the fiscal year," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "We are closing a major refinancing deal with the bank next week. Massive influx of capital. But my CFO, the idiot he quit last week, left us in a lurch right before the deadline. I need someone to organize the ledger, just tidy it up. Make sure the assets are categorized correctly so the bank underwriters do not get confused." I reached out and opened the box. It was a mess. Loose receipts, handwritten ledgers, and printouts from 3 different accounting software programs. It wasn't just disorganized, it was a crime scene. I pulled out a balance sheet from October. I scanned the columns. My eyes, trained to spot anomalies in seconds, caught them instantly. There were 3 properties listed as assets that I knew for a fact he had sold 6 months ago. There were construction expenses capitalized as land improvements to inflate the equity. There were loans from shell companies listed as revenue. It wasn't just cooking the books, it was deep frying them. "You want me to sign off on this?" I asked, keeping my voice trembling and unsure. "I want you to verify it," he corrected, leaning forward. His cologne, a musk that smelled like old money and desperation, wafted across the table. "I need a signature from an independent accountant. Just a formality. It tells the bank that a third party has reviewed the numbers and they look accurate." He wasn't asking me to organize the ledger. He was asking me to commit bank fraud. He wanted my signature on these lies. If the bank found out, which they eventually would, he could claim ignorance. He could say he was misled by his accountant. He could point the finger at me. He was setting me up to be his fall guy. He wanted me to go to federal prison so he could keep his Bentley. I looked up at him. His eyes were hard, predatory. He was waiting for me to be grateful. "I do not know Douglas," I said, pushing the paper away slightly. "These numbers, some of them do not look right. This property on Elm Street, didn't you sell that?" He slammed his hand on the table again. This time I didn't flinch. "Do not get smart with me, Hannah," he growled. "You do not understand high finance. That is a leaseback agreement. It is still an asset. Stop looking for problems and start looking for solutions. I am offering you a lifeline here." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He scribbled something quickly, ripped the page out, and slid it across the table next to the fraudulent documents. $5,000, he said. "Cash. Today. All you have to do is sign the compilation report. It will take you 2 hours. 5 grand, Hannah. That is probably what you make in 3 months in that rat hole you live in. I looked at the check. $5,000. To the Hannah he thought he knew it was a fortune. To the Hannah I actually was. It was an insult so profound it was almost funny. My hourly rate for a forensic audit was $1,200. The retainer for my firm started at $50,000. He was trying to buy my soul for the price of a used Honda. Take it, he urged, watching my face. Buy yourself some decent clothes, get a haircut, help your mother out. She worries about you, you know. She worries you are never going to make anything of yourself. This is your chance to prove her wrong. This is your chance to be part of the success. I looked at the check, then at the box of lies, then at him. He really believed it. He believed he was the benevolent king throwing scraps to the peasant. He had no idea that he was handing the murder weapon to the executioner. If I signed those papers, I would be complicit. But if I took them, if I told him I needed to work on them overnight, I would have physical evidence of his intent to defraud a federally insured bank. I would have the smoking gun. I reached out and took the check. I folded it slowly and put it in my pocket. "Okay, Douglas," I said, making my voice sound small and defeated. "I will do it. I will fix the books." He smiled. It was the smile of a shark that had just swallowed a seal. "Good girl," he said. "I knew you were smart. You can work in the study. I want those papers ready for the courier by Monday morning. Do not disappoint me, Hannah. We are counting on you." I stood up and picked up the heavy box. It felt light in my arms. It wasn't a burden. It was ammunition. "I won't disappoint you," I said. I walked out of the dining room carrying the evidence of his crimes. As I climbed the stairs to my room, I pulled out my phone and texted Leo. He took the bait. "I have the ledgers. Alert the team. We are going to need a full forensic scan by midnight." Douglas thought he had just bought himself a loan. He didn't realize he had just signed his own confession, and for $5,000 I was going to make sure he got exactly what he paid for. I sat in the dim light of the library, the smell of old leather and stale cigar smoke hanging heavy in the air. The cardboard box Douglas had given me was open on the desk, its contents spewed out like the guts of a dissected animal. I was not just organizing, I was hunting. My eyes scanned a ledger that listed construction materials for a site in Miami that I knew for a fact was still just a swamp. He was billing the company for steel and concrete that did not exist. It was a classic phantom vendor scheme, lazy and desperate. The heavy oak door creaked open behind me. I did not turn around immediately. I knew that heavy, entitled footstep. It was Brandon. He walked into the room bringing the scent of expensive bourbon and arrogance with him. I could feel his eyes boring into the back of my cheap puffer jacket, analyzing the frayed seams and the way it bunched around my shoulders. He circled the desk slowly, like a vulture inspecting a carcass that wasn't quite dead yet. He stopped in front of me, leaning his hip against the edge of the desk. He was wearing a cashmere sweater that looked soft enough to melt, and on his wrist sat a Rolex Daytona that cost more than the average American salary. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, the ice clinking a sharp rhythm in the quiet room. Still wearing that, he asked, his voice dripping with a casual cruelty that felt like being whipped with a silk cord. He gestured with his glass toward my outfit. "I mean, I knew you were struggling, Hannah, but this is just sad. You look like you dug your wardrobe out of a donation bin." I kept my head down, playing the part. I hunched my shoulders, making myself look smaller, defeated. "It keeps me warm," I mumbled, staring at the fraudulent invoices. He laughed, a short barking sound. "Warm. Right. You know, Keisha was asking about you. She wanted to know why you looked so rough. I told her you were going through a bohemian phase. It sounds better than telling my new wife that my sister is a failure." I felt a flash of heat in my chest, a spark of the old anger. But I stamped it out instantly. Emotion was a luxury I could not afford. I needed him to keep talking. I needed him to feel superior. A man who feels superior is a man who makes mistakes. He took a sip of his drink, his eyes roaming over the papers on the desk. Look, Hannah, he said, his tone shifting from mockery to impatience. We do not have all day. Dad says you are dragging your feet. Just sign the damn papers. I hesitated, my hand hovering over a page that showed a $500,000 transfer to a personal account in the Cayman Islands. I am just trying to make sure the numbers add up, Brandon. I said, my voice trembling just enough. Some of these expenses, they look personal. He slammed his glass down on a coaster, the noise echoing like a gunshot. Who cares? He snapped. It is all the same pot of money. You are so uptight. This is how business works. You move things around. You make it work. Stop acting like a forensic auditor and start acting like a sister. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I shifted in my chair, leaning forward. I casually brushed my hand against the top button of my flannel shirt. To Brandon, it looked like a nervous tick, a sign of my anxiety. In reality, I was adjusting the angle of the high-definition camera lens hidden inside the black plastic button. It was military-grade tech capable of capturing fine print from 3 feet away. I looked up at him, making sure my face showed fear. I am scared, Brandon. If the bank finds out... The bank won't find out, he interrupted, leaning over the desk, invading my space. His face was inches from mine. I could see the broken capillaries in his eyes. Unless you tell them. And you are not going to do that, are you? I shook my head quickly. No. No, of course not. Good, he said, straightening up and smoothing his sweater. Because we need this loan. Keisha's family trust doesn't unlock for another 6 months. We need liquidity now to keep up appearances. If the house of cards falls before we get her money, we all go down, including Mom. Do you want Mom on the street? He was admitting to the conspiracy. He was admitting that his marriage was a financial strategy. I leaned back slightly, ensuring the button camera had a wide angle of his face and the documents on the desk. I don't want Mom on the street, I whispered. Then sign, he said. Just put your name on the line, validate the assets. Once the loan clears, Dad will cut you that check. $5,000, Hannah. Think about what you could do with that. He looked me up and down again, a sneer curling his lip. You could finally buy some decent clothes, he said. Get a facial. Maybe buy a dress that doesn't make you look like the help. Seriously, Hannah, you are embarrassing us. Tonight is the Christmas Eve dinner. We have investors coming. Try not to look so... poor. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wad of cash. He peeled off a single $100 bill and tossed it onto the desk. It fluttered down and landed on top of the evidence of his father's embezzlement. Here, he said, go to the mall, buy something that isn't made of polyester. Consider it a down payment. I looked at the money. Then I looked at him. He was smiling, a benevolent king throwing scraps to the peasant. He had no idea that the woman sitting across from him could buy and sell him 10 times over. He had no idea that the poor sister was currently wearing a wire and recording the destruction of his life. I reached out and took the $100 bill. My fingers brushed the paper, but my eyes remained fixed on the documents. Thank you, Brandon, I said, forcing a wobble into my voice. I appreciate it. Yeah, well, someone has to look out for you, he said, turning toward the door. Just get it done, and burn those worksheets when you are finished. We don't want a paper trail. He walked out of the library, whistling a Christmas carol. The heavy door clicked shut behind him. The moment he was gone, my posture changed. I sat up straight. The fear vanished from my face, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. I tapped the button on my shirt twice to save the recording. I had him. I had him on video, admitting to the scheme, admitting to the target on Keisha's back, and attempting to bribe me. I looked at the $100 bill in my hand. I folded it crisply and placed it in my pocket next to the check Douglas had given me. I wasn't going to spend it on a dress. I was going to frame it. I looked back at the ledgers. I had enough for an indictment now, but I wanted more. I wanted everything. I wanted to know where every single cent had gone. I wanted to trace the money all the way to the bottom of the ocean. Brandon thought he had just bought my compliance with an insult and $100. He didn't realize he had just given me the final piece of the puzzle. I wasn't just poor Hannah anymore. I was the witness, the judge, and the jury, and the verdict was guilty. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times, the sound vibrating through the silent house like a heartbeat. The dinner with the investors was over. The heavy oak doors had closed on the last of the guests an hour ago. Douglas was in his study, drunk on his own lies. My mother was passed out upstairs. Brandon was presumably sleeping the sleep of the guiltless. I moved through the shadows of the second-floor corridor. I wasn't sleeping, I was working. My mind was racing with the data I had extracted from the fraudulent ledgers earlier that day. I needed water or maybe just a moment to breathe air that didn't smell of deception. I turned the corner toward the back staircase and stopped dead. A figure was blocking my path. It was Keisha. She was leaning against the wall, arms crossed over her silk robe, her silhouette cut sharp against the moonlight streaming through the window. She wasn't startled. She was waiting. "Going somewhere?" she asked. Her voice was low, devoid of the polite, deferential tone she used around Douglas and Brandon. It was the voice of a woman who was done pretending. "Just getting water," I whispered, clutching my cheap puffer jacket tighter around me, slipping back into the role of the downtrodden stepdaughter. "Sorry if I woke you." "Drop it, Hannah," she said. I paused. "What?" "The act. Drop it. It is exhausting to watch." I stared at her. My heart rate didn't spike. Instead, a cold curiosity settled over me. I had underestimated her. I had profiled everyone in this house, but I had categorized Keisha as a victim, a mark. I hadn't looked close enough. "I don't know what you mean," I said, keeping my voice trembling. She pushed off the wall and took a step toward me. Her eyes dropped to my feet. "The boots," she said. I looked down at my scuffed, muddy boots. "They look like trash," I said. "To them, maybe," she countered. "Douglas sees mud. Brandon sees poverty. But I see the stitching. That is a double welt stitch, hand sewn. And the leather isn't synthetic. It is full-grain calfskin that has been distressed artificially. I know that sole. That is from a bespoke shoemaker in Florence. I have a pair of heels from the same artisan. Those boots cost $3,000. She looked back up at my face, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "You are wearing a $3,000 pair of boots to play the part of a starving artist. Which means you aren't starving, and you certainly aren't stupid. So who are you really?" I looked at her. I evaluated the risk. She was Brandon's wife. She was the golden goose Douglas was trying to cook. But she was also sharp. She had seen through a disguise that had fooled everyone else. Game recognizes game. I straightened my spine. The slump in my shoulders vanished. The fear in my eyes was replaced by the cold, hard steel of my true nature. I let the silence stretch for a moment, letting the power dynamic in the hallway shift completely. "I am the person who is going to burn this house down," I said, my voice dropping to its natural commanding register. Keisha didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She exhaled, her shoulders relaxing as if she had been holding a heavy weight. "I knew it," she whispered. "I saw your name, Spector and Associates. I read the Wall Street Journal. I saw the article about the pharmaceutical takedown. The lead auditor was named Hannah. I just didn't put it together until I saw the shoes." "You are smarter than your husband," I observed. "That is a low bar," she said dryly. "Brandon thinks he married a checkbook. Douglas thinks he acquired a liquidity provider. They don't think I read the papers they asked me to sign." She reached into the pocket of her robe. My muscles tensed, ready for anything. But she didn't pull out a phone. She didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a key. It was a small silver key with a complex, jagged edge. It wasn't a house key. It was a high-security safe key. "Douglas keeps a private office in the basement behind the wine cellar," she said, holding the key out to me. "He thinks no one knows about it. He thinks he is the only one with a key. But I swiped this from his jacket while he was passed out last week and had a copy made." I looked at the key, then at her. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because I saw the mortgage application," she said. and for the first time, her voice shook with genuine rage. I found it in Brandon's briefcase. They are trying to leverage my parents' estate. They forged my signature on a collateral agreement. They want to mortgage the house my grandfather built to pay off their gambling debts and construction loans. She stepped closer, her eyes burning with a fierce protective fire. They think because I am quiet, I am weak. They think because I married into this circus, I am a clown. But they are wrong. They are trying to steal my family's legacy to save their own skin. She pressed the key into my hand. Her palm was warm, her grip tight. I cannot go to the police yet, she said. If I leave now, they will drain the accounts before the ink dries on the divorce papers. I need proof. I need undeniable hard evidence of the fraud so I can freeze their assets and get an annulment. I need a forensic accountant. I closed my fingers around the key. The metal was cool against my skin. It was the master key to the kingdom of lies Douglas had built. You have one, I said. I want him destroyed, Hannah, she hissed. I don't just want a divorce. I want him in prison. I want Brandon in the unemployment line. I want Douglas to die in a cell. Can you do that? I looked at this woman, this ally I had found in the darkness. She was terrified, betrayed, and cornered. But she was fighting back. She was exactly the kind of person I fought for. I won't just send him to prison, Keisha, I said. I am going to bury him under so much paper he will never see the sun again. She nodded, tears of relief shining in her eyes. The safe is behind the oil painting of the sailboat in the basement office, she whispered. The combination is your mother's birthday. Because he is a narcissist who thinks sentimental passwords make him look like a good husband. I pocketed the key. Go back to bed, Keisha. Lock your door. When the sun comes up tomorrow, this family is going to look very different. She turned to go, then paused. Hannah. Yes, nice boots. I smiled in the dark. It was the first genuine smile I had worn in this house in 5 years. Thanks, I said. I bought them with the first bonus I earned after I stopped crying over them. She disappeared down the hall, a ghost in silk. I stood alone in the corridor, the key burning a hole in my pocket. I had the motive. I had the opportunity. And now, thanks to the sister-in-law, they had underestimated I had the weapon. I turned toward the basement stairs. The house was sleeping, but the hunt was just beginning. Douglas thought he had secured his future by marrying off his son. He didn't realize he had just handed the keys to the castle to the woman who would burn it down. I moved silently through the dark, descending into the belly of the beast. I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. I was the thing that lived in it. And I was hungry. The Bentley pulled away from the house at 6 o'clock sharp, its taillights dissolving into the winter darkness like two red eyes closing. Douglas was driving, likely already half drunk on pre-game scotch. My mother was in the passenger seat, draped in a fur coat that I knew for a fact was bought on a credit card that was currently over its limit. Brandon was in the back adjusting his tie, oblivious to the fact that his life was about to implode. They were heading to the country club Christmas gala. It was the social event of the season, the place where Douglas needed to be seen to keep the rumors of his insolvency at bay. He had insisted I come. He wanted to parade his prodigal daughter around to show off the accountant who was going to fix his books. I had told him I was feeling ill, that the flight had caught up with me. I promised I would join them later for dessert. He bought it because narcissists always believe that people will do what they are told. As soon as the crunch of gravel faded into silence, I moved. I met Keisha at the top of the basement stairs. She had feigned a migraine to stay behind. She was wearing black leggings and a dark sweater, her face pale but her eyes fierce. She held the silver key in her hand like a weapon. Ready, she whispered. I nodded. Let us go. We descended into the basement. The air down here was different. It smelled of earth and expensive cedar, a stark contrast to the decaying grandeur of the upper floors. This was Douglas's sanctuary. He had built it to be soundproof, a place where he could drink and scheme without interruption. We walked past the wine cellar where dusty bottles of Bordeaux sat waiting for special occasions that would never come. At the end of the hall was a heavy oak door. Keisha slid the key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, silent click that sounded louder than a gunshot in the quiet house. We stepped inside. The office was a shrine to Douglas' ego. The walls were lined with framed newspaper clippings from 20 years ago, puff pieces about his early developments. There were photos of him shaking hands with minor celebrities and local politicians. The desk was massive, a slab of mahogany that looked like it belonged in a bank, not a basement. Behind the desk hung the oil painting Keisha had told me about. It was a sailboat on a stormy sea, a cliché of struggle and triumph. I walked around the desk and gripped the frame. It swung outward on hidden hinges, revealing a heavy steel wall safe. "The combination," I said. Keisha took a breath. "Your mother's birthday. Month, day, year." I felt a surge of disgust. He used the birthday of the woman he was bankrupting to protect the secrets of his betrayal. It was a special kind of cruelty. I punched in the numbers. 082465. The light on the keypad turned green. The bolts retracted with a heavy thud. I pulled the handle and the heavy door swung open. It wasn't disorganized like the box he had given me upstairs. This was the real archive. This was where he kept the truth. There were stacks of cash probably skimmed from construction budgets. There were passports. And there were 3 black binders. I pulled them out and laid them on the desk. I put on a pair of latex gloves I had brought from my kit. I didn't want my fingerprints on anything. I clicked on the desk lamp, bathing the leather surface in a pool of harsh yellow light. Keisha stood beside me, her arms wrapped around herself. "What are we looking for?" "Everything," I said. I opened the first binder. It was the shadow ledger. In forensic accounting, we call this the second set of books. The first set is for the IRS and the investors. The second set is for the thief. It tracks where the money actually goes so the criminal doesn't lose track of his own lies. I ran my finger down the columns. My eyes scanned the numbers, translating the data into a narrative of greed. "Here," I said, pointing to a recurring entry. "Look at this. Consulting fees paid to Sapphire Holdings, $10,000 a month. 15,000. 20. "Who is Sapphire Holdings?" Keisha asked. I pulled out my phone and logged into my firm's database. I ran a search on the entity. It took 30 seconds. "It is a shell company registered in Delaware," I said. "The registered agent is a lawyer in Miami. But look at the beneficiary address." I showed her the screen. It was a residential address in Boca Raton. I cross-referenced the address with social media. A profile popped up. A woman named Crystal. Blonde, 25 years old, posing on the deck of a boat. In one photo, she was wearing a diamond tennis bracelet. In another, she was driving a white convertible Mercedes. I looked back at the ledger. There was a wire transfer for $80,000 labeled Vehicle Fleet Acquisition. The date matched the date of the Instagram post with the car. "He isn't just stealing to save the business," I said, my voice cold. "He is stealing to fund a lifestyle for his mistress. He bought her a condo. He bought her a car. He is paying her allowance with the money he borrowed from the hard money lenders." Keisha stared at the photo of the woman. She looked sick. "He told Brandon we were broke because of the market. He said interest rates were killing us. He made us feel guilty for buying groceries. And he was sending money to her, $3 million over the last 4 years." I calculated, closing the binder. "That is where the equity went. That is why he needs your dowry. He needs to refill the pot before the mistress gets cut off." I opened the second binder. This one was thinner. It contained legal documents. I flipped through deeds, loan agreements, and insurance policies. Then I stopped. I found a withdrawal request form for a teacher's pension fund. It was my mother's fund. She had been a teacher for 30 years before she met Douglas. It was the only money she had that was truly hers. The document authorized a full liquidation of the asset. $250,000. The reason listed was emergency medical expenses. I looked at the signature at the bottom. It read, Catherine Douglas. I knew my mother's signature. It was loopy decorative, a holdover from her days teaching cursive. This signature was sharp, jagged. It tried to mimic her style, but the pressure points were all wrong. The pen had pressed too hard on the downstrokes. It was a heavy hand, a man's hand. He forged it, I whispered. He liquidated her retirement 6 months ago. He stole her future. Keisha looked at the paper. But she is alive. She isn't sick. That is perjury. That is wire fraud. That is identity theft against his own wife. He didn't care, I said. He saw a pot of money sitting there and he took it. She thinks she has a safety net. She thinks if everything goes wrong, she still has her pension. But she has nothing. She is destitute, Keisha. If he dies or goes to prison tomorrow, she is on the street. I took high-resolution photos of the document. This was the smoking gun for the family court. This was the knife that would cut my mother's loyalty to him. She could forgive a lot, but she would never forgive being left penniless. I reached for the third item in the safe. It wasn't a binder. It was a small, black external hard drive. It was labeled personal. In my line of work, personal usually meant incriminating. It meant blackmail material, or pornography, or trophies. I plugged it into my laptop. The drive encrypted, but the password protection was weak. Douglas used the same password for everything. I typed in password 1234. The folder opened. There were hundreds of files, photos of job sites, scans of contracts. But there was one video file. It was dated December 24th, 5 years ago. My breath hitched. That was the date. That was the night I left. Why would he have a video? I asked, my voice trembling. I clicked on the file. The video player opened. The footage was grainy, black and white. It was from a security camera. I recognized the angle immediately. It was a high-angle shot looking down into the sauna. I didn't know there was a camera in there, I whispered. The video played. I saw myself 5 years younger sitting on the bench in a towel. I looked so small. I looked terrified. I saw Douglas walk in. I saw him block the door. There was audio. It was tinny and distorted but clear enough. I heard him demand the money. I heard myself say no. I heard the slur in his voice, the arrogance. And then I saw it happen. I saw him strike me. On the screen, it looked even worse than I remembered. The violence was sudden and brutal. I saw my head snap back. I saw my body crumble to the floor. But then I saw what happened after. I saw my mother and Brandon enter. I saw myself on the floor bleeding, and I saw Douglas turn to the camera. He looked right at the lens, and he smiled. He winked. He winked at the camera, while his stepdaughter lay bleeding at his feet. He kept it. Keisha whispered, her hand covering her mouth. Why would he keep this? It is evidence of assault. Why wouldn't he delete it? Because it isn't evidence to him. I said, my voice shaking with a rage so pure it felt like ice in my veins. It is a trophy. He kept it to rewatch it. He kept it because it made him feel powerful. He likes seeing me weak. He likes seeing himself win. He probably watches this when he feels like a failure, just to remind himself that he is the man of the house. He was a monster. He wasn't just a thief. He was a sadist. He had preserved the moment of my greatest humiliation as a souvenir. I copied the file to my secure server. I copied everything. The ledgers, the forgery, the video. The download bar crawled across the screen, turning green as it finished. I pulled the drive out of the laptop. I put the binders back in the safe. I closed the heavy steel door and spun the dial. I put the painting back in place. I stood up and stripped off the latex gloves. I looked at Keisha. She was pale, shaking slightly. We have him, I said. We have him on embezzlement. We have him on forgery. We have him on assault. We have him on tax evasion. We have him on insurance fraud. What do we do now? She asked. Now, I said, picking up my laptop. We go to the party. But the police? The police will meet us there, I said. I already called my contact at the FBI field office in New Haven. They have been building a case against him for months, but they needed the internal records to get the warrant. I just sent them the records. They are mobilizing now. I walked toward the door of the office. I paused and looked back at the room. It didn't look scary anymore. It looked like a tomb. He thinks he is going to a party to celebrate his success, I said. He thinks he is going to charm the investors and secure the loans. He thinks he is untouchable. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. He is going to his own funeral, I said, and I am going to deliver the eulogy. I walked up the stairs, leaving the darkness of the basement behind. I wasn't the victim in the video anymore. I wasn't the girl on the floor. I was the woman with the hard drive. I was the auditor. And the books were finally about to be balanced. I went to my room and changed. I took off the cheap puffer jacket and the scuffed boots. I opened the garment bag I had hidden in the back of the closet. I pulled out a dress I had bought in Paris. It was black silk, sharp and severe. I put on my real shoes, the Louboutins with the red soles that looked like blood. I put on my diamond earrings. I pulled my hair back into a tight professional chignon. I looked in the mirror. The dark circles were gone. The fear was gone. The face staring back at me was the face of Spectre and Associates. I walked downstairs. Keisha was waiting by the front door. She had changed too into a red dress that looked like war paint. "Ready?" she asked. I checked my phone. I had a text message from Special Agent Miller. "We are en route. ETA 20 minutes. Do not let him leave." I looked at Keisha. "Let us go," I said. "I do not want to be late for the show." We walked out into the winter night, the snow crunching under our heels, and got into the rental car. We drove toward the country club, toward the lights and the music, and the man who thought he owned the world. He had no idea that the world had already moved on without him. The country club ballroom smelled of pine needles, roasted prime rib, and quiet desperation. From the doorway, it looked like a scene from a holiday movie. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables laden with silver and china. A string quartet played a soft, unrecognizable version of A Christmas Carol in the corner. Men in tuxedos swirled cognac in oversized glasses, and women in sequins laughed with their heads thrown back their throats, exposing diamonds that were likely insured for more than my college tuition. But I wasn't looking at the decorations. I was looking at the wolves. I scanned the room, identifying them one by one. There was Mr. Sterling from the commercial lending division of Chase Bank, looking bored and skeptical near the bar. There was the private equity group from Boston, a pack of 3 men who looked like they would foreclose on an orphanage if the zoning laws allowed it. These were the creditors. These were the people Douglas owed millions to. They weren't here for the eggnog. They were here to see if Douglas Estates was still a viable investment or if it was time to strip the carcass. I walked into the room. The black silk dress moved against my skin like water. My heels clicked a sharp, authoritative rhythm on the marble floor. I wasn't hiding in the shadows anymore. I walked straight down the center aisle, my head high, my eyes searching for my target. Douglas was holding court near the massive Christmas tree. He was laughing too loud, his face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. He was gripping a glass of scotch so hard, his knuckles were white. When he saw me, his expression faltered for a fraction of a second. He saw the dress, he saw the shoes, he saw the woman who didn't look like a charity case anymore, but his desperation filled in the blanks with what he wanted to see. He didn't see an executioner, he saw a trophy. He saw the prop he needed to sell the lie. He excused himself from a conversation with a local zoning commissioner and rushed toward me. He didn't hug me. He grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into the muscles, steering me away from the center of the room. "You are late," he hissed, a fake smile plastered on his face for the benefit of the onlookers. "Where are the papers? Did you sign them?" I looked at him calmly. I pulled a slim leather folder from under my arm. "It is all here, Douglas," I said. Every number is exactly where it needs to be. The relief that washed over him was repulsive. He actually sagged against me for a moment, the scent of alcohol and fear rolling off him in waves. "Good girl," he breathed. "Good girl. I knew you would come through. I knew you knew which side your bread was buttered on." He straightened his tie and looked around the room. The predatory gleam returned to his eyes. He wasn't afraid anymore. He thought he had won. He thought he had the golden ticket that would keep the Ponzi scheme running for another year. "It is time," he said. "Time for what?" "Time to show these vultures that we are solvent," he said. "Come with me." He didn't give me a choice. He dragged me toward the stage at the front of the room. He grabbed the microphone from the stand, tapping it loudly. The feedback squealed, cutting through the chatter. The room fell silent. 200 faces turned toward us. I saw my mother in the front row looking pale and terrified, clutching her wine glass. I saw Brandon and Keisha near the back. Brandon looked smug. Keisha looked like a soldier waiting for the signal to charge. Douglas beamed at the crowd. He looked powerful. He looked successful. It was the performance of a lifetime. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, partners," he boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Thank you for joining the Douglas family tonight. I know there have been rumors. The market is volatile. Construction is a tough business. Some of you have whispered that Douglas Estates is overleveraged, that we are slowing down." He paused for dramatic effect. He put his arm around my shoulders, pulling me tight against his side. It felt like being embraced by a python. "Tonight, I want to put those rumors to rest once and for all," he continued. "I want to introduce you to my daughter Hannah. She is a brilliant accountant based in New York City. She has spent the last 48 hours conducting a comprehensive internal audit of our finances. She has looked at every ledger, every asset, and every liability." He looked down at me. His eyes were hard, glassy marbles. "She is here to personally certify that Douglas Estates is not only stable but thriving. She is going to walk you through the numbers that prove we are ready for the next phase of expansion." The crowd murmured. This was unusual. This was bold. If an independent accountant from New York was vouching for him, maybe the rumors were wrong. I saw the bankers exchanging glances. I saw Mr. Sterling step closer to the stage. They were listening. Douglas leaned in to hand me the microphone. He brought his face close to my ear, close enough that his cheek brushed my hair. To the audience, it looked like a father sharing a moment of pride with his daughter. It looked affectionate. But then he whispered, "Say the words, Hannah. Validate the assets. If you make one mistake, if you embarrass me in front of these people, I will kill you. I swear to God you won't leave this room alive." He pulled back, smiling that wide, shark-like smile. He handed me the microphone. His hand was heavy and hot on my shoulder, a physical anchor trying to weigh me down. The spotlight hit me. It was blindingly white. I couldn't see the faces in the crowd anymore, just a blur of tuxedos and gowns. I was alone on the stage with the man who had tormented me, the man who had stolen from me, the man who had just threatened my life. He thought he had me. He thought fear would make me compliant. He thought I was still the 15-year-old girl who cried when he raised his voice. I took the microphone. The metal was cool in my hand. I stepped out from under his arm, creating a foot of space between us. I looked at him. I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. I watched the confidence in his eyes flicker just for a moment as he realized I wasn't reading from his script. I turned to the crowd. I didn't tremble. I didn't stutter. "My stepfather is right," I said, my voice amplified, clear and steady, reaching every corner of the room. "I have spent the last 48 hours looking at every single number in this company, and I have a lot to tell you." I reached into my bag and pulled out not the fraudulent papers he had given me, but my iPad. With a swipe of my thumb, I connected it to the massive projection screen behind us that was meant to show architectural renderings of future condos. The screen flickered to life, but it didn't show a balance sheet. It showed the logo of my firm, a black shield with silver lettering, Spectre and Associates, Forensic Accounting and Fraud Investigation. I heard a gasp ripple through the room. The bankers knew that logo. The investors knew that logo. That wasn't the logo of a tax preparer. That was the logo of the Grim Reaper of Wall Street. I looked at Douglas. His mouth had fallen open. The blood had drained from his face. He tried to grab the microphone, but I stepped back. "Let us begin," I said. The gasps in the room were not polite. They were the sounds of air being sucked out of a vacuum. The murmurs of cocktail conversation died instantly, replaced by a silence so profound I could hear the ice melting in the glasses on the front tables. I stood center stage, my iPad glowing in my hand like a weapon. Behind me, the projection screen illuminated the darkened ballroom with the stark monochromatic logo of Spector and Associates. The words, "Forensic Accounting and Fraud Investigation," loomed over Douglas's head like a judgment. Douglas was frozen. His hand was still outstretched, reaching for the microphone I had taken from him, his fingers clawing at empty air. His face had gone from flush to a sickly waxen gray. He looked at the screen, then at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying comprehension. He wasn't looking at his stepdaughter anymore. He was looking at his end. "My name is Hannah," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the speakers, steady and cold as a judge's gavel. "And contrary to what you have just been told, I am not here to certify the health of Douglas Estates. I am a senior forensic auditor for Spector and Associates, and I am here on behalf of the National Bank of Commerce to present the findings of a 6-month investigation into massive corporate fraud." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. I saw Mr. Sterling, the banker from Chase, stand up, his face hardening. The private equity wolves leaned forward, their eyes narrowing. They smelled blood. Douglas lunged for me. "You bitch!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Turn it off! Turn it off now!" He didn't make it 2 steps. 2 men in dark suits stepped out from the wings of the stage. They were my security detail ex-military contractors I had hired for exactly this moment. One of them, a man named Marcus, who looked like he was carved out of granite, stepped in front of Douglas. He didn't touch him. He just stood there, an immovable wall of muscle. Douglas slammed into him and bounced off, stumbling back toward the podium. "Sit down, Douglas," I said, not even looking at him. "We are just getting started." I swiped my thumb across the iPad screen. The image on the projector changed. Gone was the logo. In its place was a spreadsheet. It was complex, detailed, and devastating. Red lines crisscrossed the screen, tracking money flows like arterial spray. "This is the real balance sheet for Douglas Estates," I said, pointing to the screen. "As of this morning, the company has liabilities exceeding $15 million. The assets listed in the prospectus you received tonight, they do not exist." I swiped again. A new slide appeared. It was a series of wire transfers. "This is a record of $3 million in investor funds," I explained. "Money that was ostensibly raised for the riverfront development project. As you can see, the funds were never used for construction. They were wired to a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Sapphire Holdings." I swiped again. A photo appeared on the screen. It was the Instagram post of Crystal the Mistress posing with her new white Mercedes convertible. The license plate was clearly visible. Next to it, I displayed the invoice for the car paid for directly from the Sapphire Holdings account. "This is where your money went," I said to the room. "It didn't buy steel. It didn't buy concrete. It bought a Mercedes-Benz for a 25-year-old woman in Boca Raton." The room erupted. People were standing up now, shouting. I heard a woman in the back scream, "That is my husband's money." I saw my mother in the front row. She wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking at Douglas, her mouth open in a silent scream of betrayal. She had tolerated his drinking. She had tolerated his gambling. But another woman, a younger woman driving a car paid for with her pension, that was the kill shot. I wasn't done. I swiped again. A document appeared on the screen. It was the pension withdrawal form with my mother's forged signature. "This is a withdrawal request for the Teachers' Pension Fund of Catherine Douglas," I said. "The signature is a forgery. The funds were liquidated 6 months ago. The money was used to pay off a gambling debt at the Mohegan Sun Casino." My mother made a sound that I will never forget. It was a low, animalistic keen of pure despair. She slumped forward, clutching her chest, realizing in real time that she was destitute. Douglas was shouting now, incoherent rage bubbling out of him. "It is a lie. She is lying. It is all fake. She is trying to ruin me." I looked at him. I swiped the screen one last time. The video player opened. The date stamp in the corner read, December 24th, 5 years ago. "This is not fake, Douglas," I said softly into the microphone. I pressed play. The grainy black and white footage filled the massive screen. The ballroom went deathly silent. Everyone watched. They saw the sauna. They saw the 15-year-old girl in the towel. They saw the large man blocking the door. They heard the audio, tinny but unmistakable. "You are an ungrateful little leech. That money belongs to this family." They watched him strike me. The collective gasp in the room sucked the air out of the space. They watched my head snap back. They watched me fall. And then they watched the end. They watched him turn to the camera. They watched him smile. They watched him wink. The video froze on that wink, a pixelated, grotesque image of a monster reveling in his power. I looked out at the crowd. There was no confusion anymore. There was only revulsion. The investors looked sick. The bankers looked furious. My mother was sobbing into her hands. I looked at Douglas. He was staring at the screen at his own face. He looked small. He looked pathetic. The arrogance was gone, stripped away to reveal the coward underneath. "You wanted me to validate your company?" I said, my voice echoing in the silence. "I have done my job. The audit is complete. Douglas Estates is bankrupt. The CEO is a fraud, and the books are closed." I put down the microphone. It made a dull thud on the podium. That was the signal. The doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. Panic rippled through the crowd as a dozen agents in windbreakers swarmed into the room. The letters on their backs were clear: FBI, IRS, CI. Special Agent Miller, the man I had been coordinating with for weeks, marched down the center aisle. He didn't look at the guests. He looked straight at the stage. "Douglas, Douglas," he announced, his voice booming without a microphone. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, embezzlement, and aggravated assault." Douglas tried to run. It was a pathetic attempt. He scrambled toward the side exit, knocking over a table of champagne glasses. The crash of breaking glass was the only sound in the room. "Marcus," my bodyguard didn't even have to move. 2 FBI agents tackled Douglas before he made it 3 steps. They slammed him into the wall, pinning his arms behind his back. The handcuffs clicked with a sound of finality that rang through the ballroom. I watched him struggle. I watched him scream obscenities. I watched the man who had terrified me for half my life get dragged out of his own party like a common criminal. And then chaos erupted. Brandon. My brother stood up from his table. He looked terrified. He started to back away, trying to blend into the crowd. But he didn't get far. Keisha stood up next to him. She was wearing the red dress. She looked like a queen. She reached out and grabbed his arm. "Where are you going, Brandon?" She asked, her voice loud enough to be heard over the commotion. "Let go of me," he hissed. "We need to leave." Now Keisha laughed. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a manila envelope. She slapped it into his chest. "I am not going anywhere with you," she said. "Those are divorce papers. And a restraining order. My family's lawyers filed them this morning. You are not getting a dime of my money." She shoved him away. He stumbled, looking around wildly for an escape, for a savior. But there was no one. The investors he had tried to charm were looking at him with disgust. The wife he had tried to use was looking at him with hatred. Brandon looked at me on the stage. His eyes were pleading. "Hannah, please. You can't do this. We are family." I looked down at him from the height of the stage. I looked at the boy who had mocked my clothes, who had told me to sign the fraudulent papers, who had tried to bribe me with $100. I picked up the microphone one last time. "We were never family, Brandon," I said. "You were just the overhead costs." I turned and walked off the stage. I didn't look back at the ruin I had caused. I didn't look at my mother weeping on the floor. I didn't look at Douglas being shoved into a squad car outside. I walked straight to Keisha. She was standing alone in the middle of the chaos, her head held high. She looked at me and smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was real. "Nice presentation," she said. I nodded. "Thanks for the key." We walked out of the ballroom together. Two women who had survived the fire and burned down the house to do it. The flashing lights of the police cars painted the snow outside in shades of red and blue. It was the most beautiful Christmas decoration I had ever seen. The silence that followed my presentation lasted less than a second, before it was shattered by a primal scream that didn't sound human. It was the sound of a cornered animal realizing the trap had snapped shut. Douglas didn't look at the screen anymore. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at me with eyes that had turned entirely black with rage. "You ungrateful little witch!" he roared, the veins in his neck bulging against his tight collar. "I will kill you!" He scrambled up the stairs of the stage, moving with a speed I didn't think he possessed. He wasn't thinking about the bank loans or the investors or his reputation anymore. He just wanted to hurt me. He wanted to silence the voice that was reading his obituary. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I stood my ground, clutching the iPad to my chest, watching him come at me like a freight train. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Brandon, my brother, had snapped out of his shock. Seeing his father charge, he did what he had always done. He followed. He jumped up from his table, knocking over a chair, his face twisted in a mirror image of Douglas's fury. He rushed toward the stage stairs, intent on helping his father tear me down one last time. "Get her, Dad," Brandon yelled, his voice cracking. "Make her stop." But he never made it to the stairs. Keisha moved. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look around for permission. As Brandon sprinted past her, she calmly, deliberately stepped forward in her red dress. She extended her leg, the heel of her shoe catching Brandon squarely across the shin. It was perfect execution. Brandon hit the floor hard. He didn't even have time to put his hands out. He face-planted into the plush carpet with a sickening thud that vibrated through the floorboards. He slid a few feet, groaning, his expensive nose crunching against the ground. Keisha stood over him, smoothing her skirt, looking down at her husband with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Stay down, Brandon," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "You have done enough." On the stage, Douglas was 5 feet away from me. His hands were reaching for my throat. I could smell the scotch on his breath. I could see the sweat flying off his forehead. Then the waiter, who had been standing near the podium holding a tray of empty champagne flutes, dropped the tray. The sound of shattering crystal was the opening bell. He wasn't a waiter. He was Marcus, the head of my security detail, and he moved like lightning. He stepped between me and Douglas, intercepting the charge. Marcus didn't punch him. He didn't need to. He grabbed Douglas's wrist and used the man's own momentum against him. He twisted, pivoted, and slammed Douglas face first onto the hardwood floor of the stage. Douglas hit the ground with a force that knocked the wind out of him. His arm was wrenched behind his back at an angle that made the entire room wince. Marcus placed a knee in the center of Douglas's back, pinning him there like a butterfly on a board. "Stay down," Marcus commanded, his voice calm and professional. "Do not move." Douglas was wheezing, struggling against the weight, spitting curses into the floorboards. "Get off me. Do you know who I am? I own this town. I will have your job. I will ruin you. You are under arrest," a booming voice shouted from the back of the room. The double doors swung open, hitting the walls with a bang. "Federal agents, nobody move." The room froze. A dozen agents in blue windbreakers with yellow lettering poured into the ballroom. They moved with military precision, fanning out to secure the exits. The letters on their backs were clear: FBI, IRSCI. Special Agent Miller marched down the center aisle, his badge flashing under the chandeliers. He walked past the stunned investors, past my mother, who was frozen in her seat, with her hands over her mouth, and past Brandon, who was still writhing on the floor, clutching his nose. Miller walked up the stairs to the stage. He looked down at Douglas, who was pinned under Marcus's knee. Douglas William Miller said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. You are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. Marcus stepped back, allowing the agents to haul Douglas to his feet. My stepfather looked wrecked. His tuxedo was dusty, his hair was wild, and his face was purple with exertion and shame. He looked out at the crowd, searching for an ally, searching for someone to save him. Mr. Sterling, the banker, turned his back. The private equity investors were already on their phones calling their lawyers to distance themselves. The friends he had tried so hard to impress were looking at him like he was a disease. I watched as the agent snapped the handcuffs onto Douglas's wrists. The metallic click echoed in the silent room. It was the sound of a steel door slamming shut on a lifetime of lies. Douglas looked at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a sudden, terrified clarity. He realized finally that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a negotiation. Hannah, he pleaded, his voice breaking. Hannah, tell them it is a mistake. I am your father. We are family. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had slapped me, the man who had called me a leech, the man who had stolen my mother's future and tried to steal mine. I leaned into the microphone one last time. You are not my family, Douglas. I said, my voice ringing out to the back of the room. You are just a liability, I finally wrote off. Agent Miller nodded to his team. Get him out of here. They dragged him away. He didn't walk with dignity. He kicked and screamed, shouting obscenities, blaming everyone but himself. As they hauled him down the aisle, he passed my mother. Catherine, he screamed. Catherine, do something. Call the senator. Fix this. My mother didn't move. She stared straight ahead, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. She looked old. She looked broken. She realized that the man she had protected, the man she had chosen over her own daughter, had left her with nothing but shame. Brandon managed to push himself up to his knees, blood streaming from his nose onto his white shirt. He looked at his father being dragged out. Then he looked at Keisha. Honey, he whimpered, reaching a hand toward her. You have to help us. We need a lawyer. Keisha looked down at him. She stepped back, ensuring his bloody hand didn't touch the hem of her red dress. I am a lawyer, Brandon, she said coldly. But I am not your lawyer, and I am definitely not your wife anymore. She turned and walked away from him, coming to stand at the foot of the stairs, looking up at me. The ballroom was in chaos. Agents were securing computers and documents that Douglas had foolishly brought to the event. Guests were being interviewed. The illusion of Douglas Estates had been shattered into a million pieces, and I was the one holding the hammer. I looked at the screen behind me where the logo of my firm still glowed. I tapped the screen and the image faded to black. The audit was finished. I walked down the stairs. My legs felt heavy, but my head was light. Marcus fell into step beside me, his eyes scanning the crowd for threats, but the only threat in the room was already in the back of a squad car. I walked over to Keisha. She was trembling slightly, the adrenaline beginning to fade. Are you okay? I asked. She nodded, taking a deep breath. I will be. I filed the papers this morning. I froze the accounts. He didn't get a dime of my family's money. Good, I said. We turned to leave. We had to walk past my mother. She was still sitting in the front row alone. The people who had been sitting next to her had moved away, leaving a circle of isolation around her. She looked up as I passed. Her eyes were hollow. Hannah, she whispered. What am I going to do? He took everything. The house, the pension. What am I going to do? I stopped. I looked at the diamond ring on her finger, the fake stone that symbolized her entire marriage. I don't know, Mom, I said. But I suggest you start by learning how to take the bus. I didn't wait for her answer. I walked out of the ballroom, through the lobby, and into the cold night air. The flashing lights of the police cars painted the snow in shades of red and blue. It was a violent, beautiful scene. I took a deep breath of the freezing air. It tasted clean. It tasted like justice. The nightmare was over. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the one who survived, and as I watched the convoy of police cars pull away, taking the monster into the dark, I knew that for the first time in 5 years I was going to sleep through the night. The cold air bit at my skin as I walked toward the valet stand, but it felt bracing rather than painful. Behind me, the ballroom was a scene of controlled chaos, but out here, under the winter stars, the world was quiet. I handed my ticket to the attendant, my hand steady. "Wait, Hannah. Wait." I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The voice was shrill, panicked, and entirely self-serving. It was my mother. She came stumbling out of the club entrance, her fur coat flapping open, her heels skidding on the icy pavement. She wasn't running to check on me. She wasn't running to apologize. She was running because her meal ticket had just been handcuffed. She grabbed my arm, spinning me around. Her face was a mask of running mascara and terror. "What have you done?" she screamed, shaking me. "You are insane. You have destroyed us. Do you have any idea what you just did?" I pulled my arm away, brushing off the sleeve of my silk dress, as if she had left a smudge of dirt. "I stopped a crime, Mother," I said calmly. "I would think you would be grateful I kept you from being an accessory." "Grateful," she shrieked. "Grateful. They took him away. They are going to seize everything. The accounts are frozen. The house. Oh my God, the house. Who is going to pay the mortgage? Who is going to pay the club dues? Who is going to take care of me, 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 me?" It was always about her. Even now, with her husband in the back of a police car, her only thought was who would pay for her Chardonnay. "You are an adult, Mother," I said. "I suggest you get a job. I heard Walmart is hiring greeters." She stared at me, her mouth working silently. Then the tears started again. Not the silent, elegant tears she used for manipulation, but ugly, heaving sobs of genuine fear. "You can't leave me like this," she wailed. "I am your mother. I am sick. I have cancer." "Stop it," I snapped. The sharpness of my voice cut through her hysterics. "You do not have cancer. I saw your credit card statements. You spent $3,000 at a med spa last week. Dying people don't get Botox." She flinched, caught in the lie, but she recovered quickly, grasping for another lifeline. "But I have nothing. He spent it all." "My pension." "You said he took my pension. How am I supposed to live?" "I am an old woman, Hannah. You have money. You have so much money now. You have to help me. You owe me." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had watched her husband slap me and handed him a towel. I looked at the woman who had chosen a lifestyle over her own child. "I owe you nothing," I said. "You made your choice in that sauna 5 years ago. You bet on the wrong horse." I reached into my clutch. I pulled out a business card and a small wad of cash. I pressed them into her hand. "Here," I said. "That is the card for a public defender. You might need one when they start asking about the tax returns you signed jointly." She looked at the money. It was exactly $200. "And that," I said, pointing to the bills, "is for an Uber, since you like telling people to take them." She stared at the money, trembling. "But what about my jewelry?" she whispered, clutching her left hand. "At least I have the ring. It is 5 carats. It has to be worth something. I can sell it. I can start over." I smiled. It was a small, sad smile. "Oh, Mom," I said softly. "I almost forgot." I leaned in close so only she could hear the final nail being driven into the coffin of her delusions. "That ring is a cubic zirconia. Douglas swapped the real diamond out 18 months ago to pay a bookie in Atlantic City. You have been wearing glass for a year and a half," she gasped, looking down at her hand in horror. She rubbed the stone frantically as if she could polish it back into reality. "No," she whimpered. "No, he wouldn't. He loved me." "He loved your credit score," I said. "And now that is gone too." The valet pulled up in my car. It wasn't the rental. It was my car. My driver had brought it up from the city while I was inside. A sleek black Porsche Panamera. I got in. I didn't look back at her. I didn't watch her collapse onto the pavement weeping over a fake diamond and a ruined life. I drove away. I drove past the police cars. I drove past the mansion that would soon be foreclosed. I drove onto the highway heading south back to the city that never sleeps. I was alone. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't lonely. I was free. And the silence in the car was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The valet stepped aside as a sleek matte black Porsche Panamera pulled up to the curb. It was not the beat-up rental I had arrived in. It was my car brought up from the city by my personal driver, who now stepped out and held the door open for me. The engine purred with a low, menacing growl that vibrated in my chest. Brandon came stumbling out of the club, clutching a napkin to his bleeding nose. He saw the car. He saw the driver. He stopped, his eyes bulging. "Is that yours?" he stammered, the realization of just how much I had hidden from them finally sinking in. "But you said the rent, the struggle." "I lied, Brandon. I said opening the driver's side door. I am very good at it. You should know. You believed me." He looked at Keisha, who was standing beside the passenger door. She looked radiant in the flashing blue lights of the police cruisers. She reached into her clutch one last time. She did not pull out a tissue for his nose. She pulled out a thick folded document. "Here," she said, shoving it into his chest. "What is this?" he asked, grabbing it with bloody fingers. "Divorce papers." Keisha said, her voice light and airy, as if she were discussing the weather. "And a notice of eviction. My lawyers bought the mortgage note on the condo you are living in this morning. You have 30 days to get out." Brandon stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. He looked at the papers, then at the car, then back at the ballroom where his father was being read his rights. His world had completely disintegrated in the span of an hour. "Keisha, wait," he pleaded. "We can fix this, fix what she asked. You are broke, your father is a felon, and I am free." She got into the car and slammed the door. I slid into the driver's seat. The leather was soft and warm. I gripped the steering wheel, feeling the power of the machine beneath me. It felt like the power I had reclaimed. I put the car in gear. Brandon was still standing on the curb, holding his divorce papers, looking like a lost child. I did not feel pity. I felt nothing. I pressed the accelerator. The car surged forward, leaving him in a cloud of exhaust and winter chill. As we sped down the long, winding driveway of the country club, I glanced into the rearview mirror. The stately columns of the building were bathed in the chaotic, strobing lights of a dozen police cars. It looked like a crime scene. It looked like a disaster movie. It looked perfect. I reached into the center console and pulled out my sunglasses. It was midnight in the dead of winter, but I put them on anyway. It was a shield. It was a statement. Keisha looked over at me and laughed. It was a genuine, full-throated laugh of relief. "Where are we going?" she asked. I smiled, watching the red and blue lights fade into the distance behind us. "The airport," I said. "My jet is waiting. And after that, anywhere we want." I turned onto the highway, the road stretching out before us, dark and open and full of promise. I was not the stepdaughter anymore. I was not the victim. I was the author of my own life. And for the first time, the story was going to be exactly what I wanted it to be. The most profound lesson from my journey isn't about the money or the revenge. It is about the realization that your value is never determined by those who fail to see it. For years, I let my stepfather's cruelty and my mother's indifference define my reality. I believed I was the disappointment they claimed I was. But the moment I stopped seeking their validation was the moment I became unstoppable. My family mistook my silence for weakness and my distance for defeat. They didn't understand that rock bottom can be a solid foundation to build a skyscraper. I used the pain of that Christmas Eve not as an anchor to hold me down, but as fuel to propel me forward. I learned that you cannot save people who are determined to drown you just to keep themselves afloat. My mother chose her lifestyle over her child, And my brother chose easy money over integrity. They built a house of cards on the backs of others, believing they were untouchable. But the truth always balances the books eventually. This story serves as a stark reminder that family is not defined by DNA, but by behavior. Keisha became more of a sister to me in one night than Brandon had been in a lifetime, because she operated with honor and courage. True power comes from competence, preparation, and the self-respect to walk away from toxicity. I didn't need to scream to win, I just needed to be better. Justice wasn't given to me. I built it brick by brick until the walls I constructed were strong enough to keep the monsters out. If you are waiting for an apology from someone who broke you, stop waiting. Start building your own empire instead. If you have ever had to become your own hero when your family let you down, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the darkness.